The stranger walked into the Silver Spur saloon with dust coating her riding clothes and a determination in her green eyes that made every man at the card table sit up straighter. Though nobody expected Beatrice Kingsley to change their lives forever with 5 cards and a steady hand. She moved through the crowded saloon like she owned the place, her dark hair pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. The year was 1878, and Custer, South Dakota, was barely holding itself together as a town, full of prospectors, cowboys, and men trying to make their fortune in the Black Hills. The saloon smelled of whiskey, tobacco, and desperation, and the piano player in the corner was doing his best to make the out-of-tune instrument sound halfway decent. Beatrice stopped at the bar first, her leather satchel hanging from her shoulder. The bartender, a grizzled man named Pete, looked her up and down with raised eyebrows. "We do not serve women at the tables," he said, though his tone was more warning than dismissal. "I am not asking for permission," Beatrice replied, her voice carrying just enough steel to make Pete reconsider whatever he was about to say. "I am asking for a seat at that poker table, and I have got the money to buy in." She placed a small leather pouch on the bar, and the clink of coins inside caught the attention of several nearby men. Pete glanced over at the main poker table, where 5 men were currently playing. One of them, a tall cowboy with sandy brown hair and sharp blue eyes, looked up at the commotion. Blake Xander had been playing poker in the Silver Spur for 3 hours, and he was up a considerable amount. He ran a small ranch about 10 miles outside of town, and tonight he had come in to unwind after 2 weeks of breaking horses and mending fences. He was 26 years old, broad-shouldered from years of hard work, and he had a reputation for being fair but tough. When he saw the woman at the bar, something in his chest tightened unexpectedly. "Let her play," Blake called out, his voice cutting through the noise of the saloon. The other men at the table turned to stare at him. "If she has got money, she has got a seat." One of the other players, a heavyset man named Carlson who owned the general store, shook his head. "This is not a game for ladies, Xander. She will lose her money in 5 minutes." "Then you will be richer in 5 minutes," Blake said evenly. "Deal her in." Beatrice crossed the saloon floor with her head held high, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed her. She pulled out the empty chair between Blake and a thin man with a nervous twitch, setting her money pouch on the table. Up close, Blake could see that she was younger than he had first thought, maybe 23 or 24, with a face that was pretty in an unconventional way, all sharp angles and determined expressions. "I appreciate the courtesy," she said, looking directly at Blake. "It is not courtesy," he replied, shuffling the deck of cards. "It is just fair. Everyone deserves a chance to lose their money honestly." The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "We will see who loses what." The first few hands were cautious. Beatrice played conservatively, folding early when her cards were weak, betting small when she had something decent. Blake watched her carefully, trying to read her tells, but she was remarkably composed. The other men at the table started to relax, assuming she was just another amateur who would be cleaned out before midnight. But Blake noticed things they did not. He saw how her eyes flickered when she calculated odds, how her breathing stayed steady even when the pot grew large, how her fingers never trembled when she pushed her chips forward. This was not a woman who stumbled into a poker game on a whim. "Where are you from?" Blake asked during a deal, trying to sound casual. "St. Louis originally," Beatrice said, picking up her cards, "but I have been traveling for the past year." "Traveling alone," Carlson interjected, his tone skeptical. "I was traveling with my brother," Beatrice said, and something in her voice shifted, became harder. "Until 3 months ago." Blake did not press further. In the West, people had stories they did not want to tell, and he respected that. Instead, he focused on the game. The pot on the current hand was building nicely, and he had a strong hand, 3 queens. He raised the bet, and 2 of the other players folded immediately. Beatrice studied her cards, then looked up at Blake with those sharp green eyes. "I will see your bet and raise you $20. Carlson whistled low. "Getting bold, are we?" Blake's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. He called her bet, and when they laid down their cards, Beatrice revealed a full house, 10s over 7s. She collected the pot without gloating, simply stacking her chips with efficient movements. The game continued for another hour. Beatrice won some hands and lost others, but she was holding her own, which seemed to irritate Carlson more and more. The man started making snide comments about women who did not know their place, about how she was probably cheating, about how no decent woman would be in a saloon past dark. Blake felt his temper rising, but before he could say anything, Beatrice spoke up. "Mr. Carlson, if you are going to cry every time you lose a hand, perhaps you should stick to selling flour and leave the cards to people with stronger constitutions." The saloon went quiet. Then someone laughed, and soon half the room was chuckling. Carlson's face turned red and he pushed back from the table. "I am not playing with some sharp-tongued woman who probably learned her tricks in a brothel," he spat. Blake stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "Apologize." "Or what?" Carlson challenged, but there was fear in his eyes. Blake Xander was not the kind of man you wanted to cross. "Or I will make you apologize," Blake said quietly, and the promise in his voice was clear. For a moment, the 2 men stared at each other. Then Carlson grabbed his remaining chips and stalked away, muttering under his breath. Blake righted his chair and sat back down, his jaw still tight with anger. "You did not have to do that," Beatrice said softly. "Yes, I did," Blake replied. He looked at her directly. "I do not tolerate that kind of talk, regardless of who it is aimed at." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a connection that neither of them had expected. Beatrice felt her carefully constructed walls waver slightly, and Blake felt that tightness in his chest return with even more intensity. The other players had drifted away, leaving just the 2 of them at the table. The saloon was still busy, but it felt like they were in their own private world. "One more hand," Blake suggested. "Just you and me." Beatrice nodded. "What are the stakes?" Blake thought about it, then said something that surprised even himself. "If I win, you tell me why you are really in Custer. If you win, I will answer any question you want to ask me." "That is a strange wager for a poker game," Beatrice observed. "You accept?" She met his eyes, saw something there that intrigued her, something honest and solid that she had not encountered in a long time. "I accept." Blake dealt the cards with practiced ease. His heart was pounding harder than it should for a simple game, and he wondered what was happening to him. He had known this woman for less than 3 hours, and yet she had already gotten under his skin in a way no one had in years. He looked at his cards. A pair of 8s, a king, a 5, and a 3. Not great, but not terrible. He could discard and draw, try to improve his hand. But something made him hesitate. Beatrice was studying her cards with that same focused expression, and Blake found himself watching her instead of thinking about strategy. There was something haunting about her, something that spoke of pain and resilience and a strength that went bone deep. "I will take 2 cards," Beatrice said, discarding. Blake dealt her 2 new cards, then took 3 for himself, keeping only the pair of 8s. His new cards did not improve things much, giving him another 8 but nothing else useful. 3 of a kind 8s. It was a decent hand, enough to win against most draws. The betting started small, with each of them matching the other. Then Beatrice raised significantly, pushing a substantial pile of chips to the center of the table. Blake studied her face, looking for any sign of a bluff. But she was unreadable, calm and composed. He could match her bet, could even raise again, could push this game to see who would blink first. But as he sat there with his cards in hand, Blake realized something. He did not want to win. He wanted to know more about this mysterious woman, wanted to hear her story, wanted to understand what had brought her to a dusty town in South Dakota. And more than that, he wanted her to have this victory, wanted to see the triumph in her eyes. It was irrational. It was foolish. It went against every instinct he had as a poker player and as a man who had built his life on discipline and control. But sometimes the heart knows things the mind cannot understand. Blake set down his cards face up. 3 eights clearly visible. "I fold," he said quietly. "It is all yours." Beatrice stared at him in confusion. "But you have 3 of a kind. That is a strong hand. You should at least call my bet." "I know what I have," Blake said. "And I know what I am doing. I fold." "I do not understand," Beatrice said, but her hands were trembling slightly as she reached for the pot. "Show me your cards," Blake said, slowly. Beatrice laid down her hand. A pair of jacks and nothing else. She had been bluffing and they both knew it. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Blake leaned back in his chair, his blue eyes never leaving her face. "Because some things are worth more than winning. You needed this victory more than I did." Beatrice felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she had built up over months of grief and loneliness and fear. She gathered up her winnings with shaking hands, stuffing the money into her pouch. "I should go," she said, standing abruptly. "Wait," Blake said, reaching out but not quite touching her. "You won the hand. You get to ask me any question you want." Beatrice paused, looking down at him. In the lamplight of the saloon, he looked younger, more vulnerable than she had first thought. There was kindness in his face and something else, something that made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with cards or money. "Why did you really fold?" she asked. Blake stood up, and they were close now, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of leather and sage on him. "Because from the moment you walked in here, I have not been able to think straight. Because you are the bravest person I have seen in a long time. Because I wanted to do something decent in a world that is not always decent. Take your pick." Beatrice stared at him, and for the first time in months she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them away furiously. "You do not know anything about me." "Then tell me," Blake said. "I have got a ranch about 10 miles from here, with a spare room and a housekeeper who makes the best biscuits in South Dakota. You look like you could use a safe place to rest for a while." "I am not a charity case," Beatrice said, but there was less bite in her words than she intended. "I am not offering charity," Blake replied. "I am offering hospitality. There is a difference. She should say no. She should take her winnings and find a boarding house and continue with her original plan, whatever that had been." But the truth was, Beatrice was exhausted. Exhausted from traveling, from grieving, from being constantly on guard. And this cowboy with his honest eyes and unexpected kindness was offering her something she had not had in a long time, a chance to breathe. "Just for a few days," she heard herself say. Blake's face broke into a smile that transformed his features, made him look almost boyish. "Just for a few days," he agreed. They left the saloon together, walking out into the cool night air. Custer was quiet at this hour, with only a few lights still burning in windows. Blake led her to where his horse was tied up, a sturdy bay gelding with a calm temperament. "We can ride double if you are comfortable with that," Blake said. "Otherwise I can rent a horse from the livery, though it will take a bit of time." "Double is fine," Beatrice said. She had been riding horses since she was a child, and the practicality of it made sense. Blake mounted first, then reached down to help her up. His hand was warm and calloused, and when she settled behind him on the horse, she had to put her arms around his waist to steady herself. She felt him tense slightly at the contact, and she wondered if he was as affected by her presence as she seemed to be by his. The ride to Blake's ranch took about 40 minutes. They moved through the darkness under a sky full of stars, the only sounds the steady clip of the horse's hooves and the occasional call of a night bird. Beatrice found herself relaxing against Blake's back, feeling safer than she had in months. "You are good with horses," Blake commented after a while. "My father bred horses back in Missouri," Beatrice said, "before he died." "I am sorry," Blake said quietly. "It was 10 years ago," Beatrice replied. "I have had time to make peace with it." But Blake heard the sadness in her voice anyway, recognized the kind of grief that never fully goes away, just becomes part of who you are. The ranch house appeared in the distance, a solid structure with a porch and several outbuildings nearby. Even in the darkness, Beatrice could tell it was well maintained, the kind of place built by someone who took pride in their work. Blake dismounted and helped Beatrice down, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. Then he led the horse to the barn, gesturing for her to follow. "I need to take care of him first," Blake said, "but it will not take long." Beatrice watched as Blake unsaddled the horse, rubbed him down, and made sure he had water and feed. There was a gentleness in the way he worked, a care that spoke of someone who understood the value of the animals in his charge. "How long have you had this ranch?" Beatrice asked. 4 years, Blake said. "I worked as a ranch hand for 8 years before that, saved every penny I could. When old Mr. Henderson decided to sell, I was able to buy this place. You run it alone, mostly. I have a hand named Tommy who helps with the heavy work, and Mrs. Chen comes in 3 times a week to cook and clean. But yeah, it is mostly just me." "That sounds lonely," Beatrice said before she could stop herself. Blake looked at her over the horse's back. "Sometimes it is, but I like the quiet, the honest work. And I am building something that is mine, you know, something that will last." Beatrice did know. She understood that need to create something solid in a world that felt increasingly unstable. When Blake finished with the horse, he led Beatrice to the main house. Inside, it was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and a stone fireplace. Blake lit a few lamps and warm light filled the space. "The spare room is through there," Blake said, pointing to a door off the main room. "It is not fancy, but the bed is comfortable and the sheets are clean. Mrs. Chen just changed them yesterday." "Thank you," Beatrice said. She felt suddenly awkward, uncertain of what to do or say. Blake seemed to sense her discomfort. "You must be hungry. Let me put together some food." He moved to the kitchen area and started pulling out bread, cheese, and cold meat. Beatrice sat at the table, watching him work. There was something soothing about his movements, practiced and efficient. "So, are you going to tell me why you are in Custer?" Blake asked as he set a plate in front of her. Beatrice took a bite of bread, considering how much to reveal. "My brother and I came west after our mother died last year. She was the last of our family, and there was nothing keeping us in St. Louis. Samuel had this idea that we could make a fortune in the gold fields. But that did not work out," Blake guessed. "No," Beatrice said, her voice going flat. "We got to Deadwood 3 months ago. Samuel was killed in a mining accident 2 weeks later. Cave-in." Blake set down his own food, his expression pained. "God, I am so sorry." "He was 25 years old," Beatrice continued, and now that she had started talking, she could not seem to stop. "He was funny and optimistic, and he believed that good things were going to happen to us. And then he was just gone. I used what money we had to bury him properly, but there was not much left after that. I have been moving from town to town, taking odd jobs, playing cards when I can." "You are good at cards," Blake observed. "My father taught me," Beatrice said. "He said that knowing how to read people and calculate odds were valuable skills, no matter what life threw at you. I never thought I would be using those skills to survive, but here we are." Blake reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The touch was gentle, comforting, and Beatrice felt that crack in her chest widen a little more. "You are not alone anymore," Blake said. "At least not tonight." Beatrice looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. "You do not owe me anything. I am a stranger who walked into a saloon." "Maybe that is true," Blake said, "but sometimes strangers become something more." They sat like that for a long moment, the lamp light flickering around them, the night pressing against the windows. Then Beatrice gently pulled her hand away, standing up. "I should get some sleep," she said. "It has been a long day." "Of course," Blake said, standing as well. "If you need anything, my room is on the other side of the house. Do not hesitate to wake me." Beatrice nodded and retreated to the spare room. It was small but clean, with a bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the ranch. She sat on the edge of the bed and let herself shake, let herself feel all the emotions she had been holding back for months. She had lost everything. Her mother, her brother, her home, her sense of security. She had been drifting, barely surviving, not sure what she was even living for anymore. And then a cowboy with kind eyes had folded a winning hand and offered her a place to rest. Beatrice lay down on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. She told herself she would stay for 2 days, maybe 3. Just long enough to catch her breath and figure out her next move. She would not let herself get attached. She would not let herself hope for anything more than temporary shelter. But even as she made these promises to herself, she knew they were lies. Something had shifted tonight, something fundamental and irreversible. She fell asleep thinking about the way Blake had looked at her, like she was something precious and worth protecting. The next morning, Beatrice woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She changed into her spare dress, which was wrinkled from being in her satchel but at least clean, and ventured out of her room. Blake was at the stove, cooking breakfast with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "Morning. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Beatrice admitted. "Coffee," Blake offered, and she nodded gratefully. They ate breakfast together, and the conversation flowed more easily than it had the night before. Blake told her about his plans for the ranch, how he wanted to build up his horse herd and maybe start breeding cattle. Beatrice told him about St. Louis, about the life she had left behind. "You ever think about going back?" Blake asked. "There is nothing to go back to," Beatrice said. "Everything I knew is gone. I suppose that means I am free to go anywhere, be anyone." "That is one way of looking at it," Blake agreed. After breakfast, Blake showed her around the ranch. He introduced her to his horses, 6 of them currently, each with their own personality. There was a vegetable garden behind the house that was struggling but producing, and a chicken coop with a dozen hens. "It is not much yet," Blake said, "but it has potential." "It is more than most people have," Beatrice replied. She could see the pride in his face, the way he looked at this land like it was the most valuable thing in the world. Over the next few days, Beatrice fell into a routine. She helped with chores around the ranch, cooking meals and tending the garden. Blake was surprised by how capable she was, how she never shied away from hard work. They talked while they worked, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Blake learned that Beatrice had wanted to be a teacher before her life fell apart, that she loved reading and could recite poetry from memory. Beatrice learned that Blake had grown up in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers, and that he had come north to make his own way after his father's ranch was divided among the older sons. "You miss them?" Beatrice asked one afternoon as they were mending a fence. Sometimes, Blake admitted. But we were never that close. My brothers thought I was too soft, too focused on books and ideas instead of cattle and guns. You do not seem soft to me, Beatrice said. Blake laughed. I am not really, but I do not believe you have to be cruel or hard to survive out here. I think you can build something good without losing your humanity in the process. That is a rare perspective, Beatrice observed. Maybe, but it is the only way I know how to live. On the fourth day, Beatrice was in the kitchen making bread when she heard horses approaching. She looked out the window and saw 3 men riding up to the house. There was something about them that made her uneasy, something predatory in the way they moved. Blake came out of the barn and walked toward them, his posture casual but alert. Beatrice could not hear what was being said, but she saw one of the men gesture toward the house, saw Blake shake his head firmly. The conversation grew heated. One of the men dismounted and got in Blake's face, and Beatrice felt her heart start to pound. Without thinking, she grabbed the rifle that Blake kept near the door and walked outside. "Is there a problem?" she called out, her voice steady. All 4 men turned to look at her. The stranger who had dismounted sneered. Well, Xander has got himself a woman. That is new." "State your business or leave," Beatrice said, raising the rifle slightly. Blake's expression was a mix of concern and admiration. "Beatrice, go back inside. I have got this." "I do not think you do," Beatrice replied, keeping her eyes on the strangers. The man who seemed to be the leader, a tall figure with a scar across his cheek, chuckled. "Got some fire in her. I like that. Tell you what, Xander, we will leave you alone if you sell us those 2 mares you have got in the barn. We know they are quality stock." "They are not for sale," Blake said flatly. "I have told you that 3 times now, Garrett." "Everything is for sale at the right price," Garrett replied. "Not to you," Blake said. "You have a reputation for running horses into the ground. I would not sell you a lame mule, let alone good breeding stock." Garrett's face darkened. "You are making a mistake, Xander." "I will take my chances," Blake said. For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then Garrett mounted his horse again, his 2 companions following suit. "This is not over," Garrett said. "We will be back." They rode off, leaving a cloud of dust behind them. Blake turned to Beatrice, who was still holding the rifle. "You can put that down now," he said gently. Beatrice lowered the weapon, her hands shaking slightly. "Who were they?" "Trouble," Blake said. "Garrett Wilson and his boys. They have been trying to buy my best horses for months, and they do not take no for an answer." "Are they dangerous?" "They can be," Blake admitted. "But I am not going to be bullied into selling. Those horses are the foundation of my breeding program." Beatrice followed him back into the house. "You should report them to the sheriff." "The sheriff in Custer is not exactly effective," Blake said with a wry smile. "Half the time he is drunk, and the other half he is looking the other way while his friends break the law. No, I will handle this on my own." "You mean we will handle it," Beatrice corrected. Blake looked at her, really looked at her, and Beatrice saw something shift in his expression. "You do not have to stay, you know. This could get ugly." "I am not going anywhere," Beatrice said, and she meant it. That night, Blake insisted on teaching Beatrice how to properly shoot the rifle. They went out behind the barn and set up targets, and he stood behind her, guiding her hands, showing her how to breathe and aim. "Squeeze the trigger, do not pull," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear. Beatrice fired, and the shot went wide. She tried again and again, until finally she hit the target. "There you go," Blake said, pride in his voice. "You are a natural." Beatrice turned in his arms, and suddenly they were face to face, so close she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. The air between them felt charged, electric. "Blake," she whispered, and she was not even sure what she was asking for. He reached up and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I know I should not feel this way. I know you just lost your brother, that you are grieving, that the timing is terrible." "But," Beatrice prompted. "But I cannot help it," Blake said. "From the moment you walked into that saloon, you have been all I can think about. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and I want to protect you from everything bad in this world." Beatrice felt tears sting her eyes. "You folded for me. No one has ever done anything like that before." "I would fold 1,000 hands for you," Blake said. "I would give up everything if it meant keeping you safe." "That is not rational," Beatrice said, but her voice was shaking. "Love rarely is," Blake replied, and then he kissed her, soft and tentative at first, like he was afraid she might pull away. But Beatrice leaned into him, her arms coming up around his neck, and the kiss deepened. It was like coming home after a long journey, like finding something she had not even known she was searching for. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I am scared," Beatrice admitted. "I have lost so much already. I do not know if I can survive losing you too." "Then do not lose me," Blake said. "Stay here, build a life with me. We will make something good together, something that lasts." "You barely know me," Beatrice protested weakly. "I know enough," Blake said. "I know you are the person I have been waiting for my whole life." Beatrice wanted to believe him. More than anything, she wanted to believe that she could have this, that she deserved happiness after so much pain. "Ask me again in the morning," she said finally. "When we are both thinking clearly." Blake smiled and kissed her forehead. "I will ask you every morning for the rest of our lives if that is what it takes." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and that night Beatrice lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, her heart full of hope and fear in equal measure. But 2 hours later, she woke to the smell of smoke. Beatrice threw off her covers and ran to her door. The main room was filling with smoke, and through the window she could see flames licking up the side of the barn. "Blake!" she screamed. He was already awake, pulling on his boots. "The barn is on fire. We need to get the horses out." They ran outside together into chaos. The barn was fully engulfed, and Beatrice could hear the horses screaming in fear. Without hesitation, Blake ran toward the flames. "Blake, no!" Beatrice shouted, but he was already inside. She looked around frantically and saw a water pump near the house. She grabbed a bucket and started pumping, knowing it was probably futile but needing to do something. Other buckets were scattered around, and she filled them as fast as she could. Blake emerged from the barn leading 2 terrified horses, their eyes rolling in fear. He handed the leads to Beatrice and ran back in. He did this 3 more times, bringing out all 6 horses, coughing and covered in soot. "That is all of them," he gasped. "Let it burn." They stood there together, watching as the barn collapsed in on itself, sending up a shower of sparks. The horses milled around nervously, and Beatrice tried to keep them calm while Blake checked each one for injuries. "This was not an accident," Blake said, his voice hard. "Someone set this fire." "Garrett," Beatrice said. "Probably," Blake agreed. "He wanted to send a message." "What are we going to do?" Blake looked at her, his face grim in the firelight. "We are going to rebuild, and we are going to make sure he pays for this." But as the sun rose and they surveyed the damage, the reality of the situation became clear. The barn was completely destroyed, along with all of Blake's tack, his tools, and most of his winter hay. It would cost hundreds of dollars to rebuild, money that Blake did not have. Mrs. Chen arrived mid-morning and was horrified by what she found. She immediately took charge, making food and organizing what needed to be done. Tommy, the ranch hand, showed up an hour later and started constructing a temporary corral for the horses. Beatrice worked alongside them, but her mind was racing. She thought about the money she had won at poker, still tucked away in her satchel. It was not enough to rebuild the barn, but it might be enough to buy materials and hire help. That evening, after everyone else had gone home and Blake was sitting on the porch staring at the ruins of his barn, Beatrice sat down beside him and pulled out her money pouch. "Here," she said, pressing it into his hands. Blake looked at the pouch, then at her. "I cannot take your money." "Yes, you can," Beatrice said. "You gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. You made me feel safe for the first time in months. Let me help you rebuild." "Beatrice, this is everything you have." "No," she said firmly. "Everything I have is right here. This place, these horses, you. The money is just paper and coins. Let me use it for something that matters." Blake stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the emotion warring in his face. Finally, he set the pouch aside and pulled her into his arms. "I do not deserve you," he said against her hair. "That is not true," Beatrice replied. "We deserve each other." They sat like that as the sun set, holding each other in the gathering darkness, and Beatrice felt something settle inside her. This was where she was meant to be. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked from sunrise to sunset rebuilding the barn. Blake used Beatrice's money to buy lumber and nails, and word spread through the community about what had happened. Neighbors who Blake had helped over the years showed up with tools and willing hands. Even people who did not know him came to help, because that was the way things worked out here. When one person was in trouble, everyone pitched in. Beatrice worked as hard as anyone, hauling boards and pounding nails until her hands were covered in blisters. Blake kept trying to make her rest, but she refused. "I am not delicate," she told him. "And this is my home now, too." Those words seemed to mean everything to Blake. He looked at her like she had given him the world. The new barn was not as large as the old one, but it was solid and well built. On the day they finished, Blake organized a celebration, inviting everyone who had helped. Mrs. Chen cooked enough food for an army, and someone brought a fiddle. As the sun set and people gathered in the yard, Blake pulled Beatrice aside. "I have something to ask you," he said, and Beatrice could hear the nervousness in his voice. "What is it?" Blake took both of her hands in his. "I know we have not known each other long. By any reasonable standard, this is crazy and impulsive and probably the worst idea I have ever had." "That is not a very promising start," Beatrice said, but she was smiling. "But I love you," Blake continued. "I love your courage and your strength and the way you throw yourself into everything you do. I love that you walked into a saloon and changed my entire life. I love that you held a rifle on 3 dangerous men without flinching. I love everything about you." Beatrice felt tears streaming down her face. "Blake, marry me," he said. "Help me build this ranch into something amazing. Have children with me. Grow old with me. Say yes." For a moment, Beatrice could not speak. She thought about her brother, about how he had believed good things were possible even in the darkest times. She thought about her parents, who had loved each other deeply until the day her father died. She thought about all the pain and loss she had endured, and how this man had somehow made her believe in joy again. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Blake let out a whoop of joy and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while everyone cheered. When he set her down, he kissed her soundly, not caring who was watching. "I do not have a ring," he said apologetically. "I do not care about a ring," Beatrice replied. "I only care about you." They were married 3 weeks later in the church in Custer, with Mrs. Chen and Tommy standing as witnesses. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, and Blake wore his best suit. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Blake kissed her like it was the first and last kiss they would ever share. The reception was held at the ranch, and it seemed like half the town showed up. People brought food and gifts, and the celebration lasted well into the night. Beatrice danced with Blake under the stars, feeling happier than she had thought possible. "I am the luckiest man alive," Blake murmured as they swayed together. "I am pretty lucky too," Beatrice replied. Later that night, when all the guests had gone home, Blake carried Beatrice over the threshold of their house. Their house. It still felt surreal. "Are you nervous?" Blake asked gently. "A little," Beatrice admitted. "But mostly I am just happy." "Me too," Blake said. He set her down carefully and cupped her face in his hands. "I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy." "You already do," Beatrice whispered. They came together slowly, tenderly, with a gentleness that spoke of deep respect and deeper love. Blake treated her like she was precious, like she was the most important thing in his world. And Beatrice gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Beatrice traced patterns on Blake's chest. "Do you think Samuel would have liked you?" she asked softly. Blake considered the question. "I hope so. I would have liked to meet him, to thank him for bringing you west." "I used to be so angry at him for that," Beatrice confessed. "For dragging me away from everything I knew, for getting himself killed and leaving me alone. But now, I think maybe it happened the way it was supposed to. Maybe I needed to lose everything to find what really mattered." "I am sorry you had to go through so much pain," Blake said. "But I am grateful that your path led you to me." "So am I," Beatrice said. They fell asleep in each other's arms, and for the first time since her brother died, Beatrice slept without nightmares. The following months were the happiest of Beatrice's life. She and Blake worked side by side every day, building their ranch and their life together. They acquired more horses, and Beatrice discovered she had a gift for training them. Blake taught her everything he knew about breeding and horsemanship, and she proved to be an eager student. The garden flourished under Beatrice's care, and she started selling vegetables in town. She also began teaching reading and writing to some of the local children in the evenings, fulfilling her old dream of being a teacher in a different way. Blake proved to be everything Beatrice could have wanted in a husband. He was kind and patient, but also passionate and devoted. He made her laugh every day, and he never failed to tell her how much he loved her. They built a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection, and their love only grew stronger as time passed. But the shadow of Garrett Wilson still loomed over them. Blake kept a rifle near the door at all times, and they took turns keeping watch at night. There were no more fires, but they heard rumors that Garrett was telling people Blake had cheated him somehow, that the horses on the Xander ranch rightfully belonged to Wilson. "Let him talk," Blake said when Beatrice expressed concern. "Everyone knows what kind of man he is. No one believes his lies." But then one afternoon in early autumn, Garrett and his men showed up at the ranch again. Blake was out checking the far pasture, and Beatrice was alone in the house. She heard the horses and looked out to see Garrett dismounting, his two companions staying on their horses. Beatrice grabbed the rifle and stepped onto the porch. "Blake is not here," she called out. "You need to leave." "I did not come to see Blake," Garrett said, walking closer. "I came to make you an offer. I am not interested in anything you have to say. Hear me out," Garrett said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I know you are a smart woman, Mrs. Xander, smart enough to play poker with the men, smart enough to catch yourself a rancher. You know this ranch is struggling. One bad winter and you will lose everything." "We are doing just fine," Beatrice said coldly. "For now," Garrett agreed. "But what happens when the money runs out? What happens when Blake cannot afford to feed those horses through the winter? I am offering you a way out. Convince your husband to sell me those 2 mares, and I will pay double what they are worth. That is enough to see you through to spring." "Those horses are not for sale," Beatrice said. "Not at any price." "You are making a mistake," Garrett said, his friendly tone falling away. "I am trying to be reasonable here." "No, you are not," Beatrice replied. "You burned our barn and now you are trying to take advantage of the situation you created. I know your type, Mr. Wilson. You are a bully and a coward, and I will not let you intimidate us." Garrett's face went red with anger. "You should watch your mouth, woman." "Or what?" Beatrice challenged, raising the rifle. "You will burn something else. You will threaten me. I have faced harder things than you and survived." "Have you now?" Garrett sneered. "Like what? Losing your drunk of a brother in a mine collapse." Beatrice felt rage surge through her, hot and consuming. "My brother was worth 10 of you." "Your brother was a fool who got himself killed chasing gold," Garrett said cruelly. "Just like your husband is a fool who is going to lose everything chasing some dream of being a horse breeder." "Get off our land," Beatrice said, her voice shaking with fury. "Right now." "I will leave when I am ready," Garrett said. He took another step toward the porch and Beatrice fired a warning shot into the dirt at his feet. Garrett jumped back, startled. "You crazy woman!" "The next one goes in your chest," Beatrice said calmly. "Leave. Now." For a moment, Garrett looked like he might challenge her. But then one of his companions called out, "Garrett, riders coming." They all turned to see Blake galloping toward them, along with Tommy and 2 other men from neighboring ranches. Blake jumped off his horse before it even stopped, running to the porch. "Beatrice, are you all right?" he demanded. "I am fine," she said. "But Mr. Wilson was just leaving." Blake turned to face Garrett, his expression murderous. "If you ever come onto my property again, if you ever speak to my wife again, I will kill you. That is not a threat, that is a promise." "You cannot prove I did anything wrong," Garrett said, but he was backing toward his horse. "I do not need to prove anything," Blake said. "Everyone in this county knows what you did, and now they know you came here to threaten a woman while her husband was away. You think that makes you look strong. It makes you look pathetic." The other ranchers who had come with Blake nodded in agreement. One of them, an older man named Harrison, spoke up. "Wilson, you have worn out your welcome in this area. We have all had enough of your threats and your thieving ways. If I were you, I would find somewhere else to do business." Garrett looked at the assembled men, clearly outnumbered and outmatched. "This is not over." "Yes, it is," Blake said flatly. Garrett and his men rode off, and this time everyone could feel that they were truly gone. Blake turned to Beatrice and pulled her into his arms. "I am so sorry I was not here," he said. "You are here now," Beatrice replied, "and I handled it." Blake pulled back to look at her face. "You fired at him." "Just a warning shot," Beatrice said. "But I would have shot him for real if I had to." Blake laughed, a sound of pure admiration. "That is my girl." Harrison and the other ranchers congratulated Beatrice on her courage, and word of what happened spread quickly through the community. Beatrice became something of a local legend, the woman who had faced down Garrett Wilson with nothing but a rifle and pure determination. Garrett left the area not long after, and they heard he had moved up to Montana. Blake and Beatrice were finally able to relax, to focus on building their life without constantly looking over their shoulders. That winter was hard but manageable. The new barn kept the horses safe, and Blake's careful planning meant they had enough hay and grain to last until spring. Beatrice taught school in the town during the coldest months, earning extra money that helped with supplies. And in February, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She waited to tell Blake until she was certain, and then she planned a special dinner. Mrs. Chen helped her prepare Blake's favorite foods, and Beatrice wore her best dress. Blake knew something was up as soon as he walked in. "What is the occasion?" "Sit down," Beatrice said, smiling mysteriously. They ate dinner together, talking about their day, and then Beatrice reached across the table and took his hand. "I have news," she said. Blake's eyes widened. "You are pregnant." How did you know? Beatrice asked, surprised. You have been glowing for days, Blake said. And you have not had coffee in a week, which is completely unlike you. I have been hoping but not wanting to ask in case I was wrong. Beatrice laughed. Well, you are not wrong. We are going to have a baby. Blake came around the table and dropped to his knees in front of her, placing his hands on her still flat stomach. I love you so much, both of you. We love you too, Beatrice said, running her fingers through his hair. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Beatrice continued to work around the ranch, though Blake became increasingly protective as her belly grew. Mrs. Chen fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate enough and rested when she needed to. In late September of 1879, Beatrice went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth, but Blake stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Blake cried openly. He is perfect, Blake said, cradling the tiny baby with infinite care. He has your eyes, Beatrice observed tiredly. They named him Benjamin Samuel Xander, after Blake's father and Beatrice's brother. Benjamin was a healthy, happy baby who seemed to love the ranch as much as his parents did. Life settled into a new rhythm. Beatrice balanced caring for Benjamin with helping Blake run the ranch. She proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving but also practical. Blake was completely devoted to his son, spending every free moment with him. As Benjamin grew, it became clear he had inherited his mother's quick mind and his father's gentle way with animals. By the time he was 3, he was following Blake around the ranch like a shadow, asking a million questions and soaking up everything he was taught. 2 years after Benjamin was born, Beatrice had a daughter. They named her Sarah Rose, and she was as different from her brother as night from day. Where Benjamin was serious and thoughtful, Sarah was wild and fearless, always getting into mischief. She is exactly like you, Blake told Beatrice one day as they watched Sarah try to climb onto a horse that was far too big for her. I was never that bold, Beatrice protested. You walked into a saloon full of men and demanded a seat at a poker table, Blake reminded her. You faced down Garrett Wilson with a rifle. You are the boldest woman I know. Beatrice smiled. I suppose I have had to be. The years passed in a blur of hard work and deep joy. The ranch prospered and Blake's reputation as a horse breeder grew. People came from hundreds of miles away to buy his stock, which was known for its temperament and endurance. Beatrice continued teaching, eventually starting a small school on their property for the local children. She loved seeing young minds grow and develop, and she never charged families who could not afford to pay. Benjamin grew into a tall, serious young man who loved books as much as horses. Sarah became an accomplished rider who could outshoot most of the men in the county. Blake and Beatrice watched their children grow with pride and wonder, grateful every day for the life they had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Blake took Beatrice back to the Silver Spur Saloon in Custer. It was a surprise, and Beatrice was confused when they walked in. Why are we here? She asked. Blake led her to the same table where they had first played poker. He sat down and pulled out a deck of cards. I thought we should recreate our first meeting, he said. Beatrice sat across from him, smiling. Are you sure you want to do that? You lost pretty badly, as I recall. Actually, I won, Blake said. I won everything that mattered. He dealt the cards and they played a hand. This time, Beatrice had the winning cards, but when it came time to show her hand, Blake laid down his cards first. I fold, he said, just like he had 10 years ago. It is all yours. You are not folding a good hand again, are you? Beatrice asked suspiciously. No, Blake said. This time I really do have nothing, but there is something else I want to give you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond. "I never gave you a proper engagement ring," Blake said. "I wanted to wait until I could afford something worthy of you." Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes as Blake slipped the ring onto her finger. "It is beautiful. Not as beautiful as you," Blake said. "Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who did not know what he was doing. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for being the best wife, mother, partner, and friend I could ever ask for." "Thank you for folding," Beatrice said. "Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving. Thank you for loving me even when I did not know how to love myself." They kissed across the poker table while the other patrons cheered, and Beatrice thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. She had come to this saloon a broken, lost woman with nothing but a handful of coins and a heart full of grief. She had left with a future full of hope and love. The years continued to roll by, bringing new challenges and new joys. Benjamin eventually married a schoolteacher from Rapid City, a smart woman named Clara who shared his love of learning. They gave Blake and Beatrice 3 grandchildren, and Benjamin took over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch. Sarah surprised everyone by falling in love with a lawyer from Deadwood. She moved to town but visited the ranch often, bringing her own 2 children to run wild in the fields where she had grown up. Blake and Beatrice aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing year. They sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the land they had built together, holding hands and remembering. "You ever regret it?" Blake asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "Staying here instead of going back east, living this hard life instead of something easier." Beatrice looked at him, at the silver in his hair and the lines around his eyes, at the hands that had worked so hard to build something good. She thought about their children and grandchildren, about the school she had founded, about the community they had become part of. "Not for a single second," she said. "This is exactly where I was meant to be." "I am glad," Blake said, "because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "You will never have to," Beatrice promised. They sat there as the stars came out, surrounded by the sounds of the ranch, the distant whinny of horses and the call of night birds. They had faced down fires and threats, poverty and loss, the countless small hardships that came with building a life in the West. But they had faced them together, and that had made all the difference. Beatrice thought about that night in the saloon so many years ago, about how a simple game of poker had changed everything. She thought about Blake folding a winning hand, about that inexplicable gesture of generosity that had started it all. Sometimes the biggest victories came from knowing when to fold, when to let go of what you thought you wanted in order to gain something infinitely more valuable. Blake had folded his hand and won her heart. And in return, Beatrice had given him everything she had, everything she was, everything she would ever be. It was the best trade either of them had ever made. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Blake pulled Beatrice closer and kissed the top of her head. "I love you." "I love you too," Beatrice replied. "Always have, always will." The ranch continued to thrive under Benjamin's management. He expanded the horse breeding operation and added cattle, making the Xander Ranch one of the most successful in the region. But he never forgot the lessons his parents had taught him about treating people fairly, about building something that would last. Blake and Beatrice spent their later years surrounded by family, teaching their grandchildren the same things they had taught their own children. They told stories about the old days, about facing down Garrett Wilson and rebuilding the barn, about the hard work and determination it took to survive. But mostly they told stories about love, about how 2 strangers had found each other in a saloon and built something beautiful together. Blake Xander passed away in his sleep at the age of 78, holding Beatrice's hand. He went peacefully, with no regrets and no unfinished business. The entire community turned out for his funeral, and person after person stood up to talk about his kindness, his integrity, his unwavering devotion to his family. Beatrice grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. She had had 50 wonderful years with the love of her life, and she carried those memories like treasures. She continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, teaching school and tending her garden. 2 years later, on a warm spring morning, Beatrice sat down on her porch with a cup of coffee and a book of poetry. She watched the sun rise over the land that had been her home for so long, and she smiled. She thought about Samuel, about how his dream of going west had led her to this life. She thought about her parents and hoped they would be proud of the woman she had become. She thought about Blake, about that first night when he had looked at her like she was something precious. As the sun climbed higher, Beatrice closed her eyes and let the warmth wash over her. She was tired, but it was the good kind of tired that came from a life well lived. When Benjamin found her an hour later, she looked peaceful, like she was simply sleeping. On her finger, she still wore the ring Blake had given her on their 10th anniversary, and in her lap was a worn deck of cards. They buried her next to Blake on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, "Beatrice Kingsley Xander, beloved wife, mother, and teacher. She never folded." The ranch continued for generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story that had started with a poker game and a cowboy who knew when to fold. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the family gathered on the porch, someone would always tell the story of how it all began. About a woman who walked into a saloon with nothing but courage and a handful of coins. About a cowboy who saw something worth saving and made an impossible choice. About a single hand of poker that became a lifetime of love. "It is all yours," Blake had said that night, laying down his cards. And Beatrice had taken what he offered and turned it into something magnificent, something that would outlast both of them, something that would echo through the years like a promise kept. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the hands you were dealt, but how you played them. Not the victories you claimed, but the ones you gave away. Not the fortune you accumulated, but the love you built. Blake and Beatrice had understood that from the very beginning. And in understanding it, they had won everything that truly mattered. Their story became legend in Custer and beyond, passed down through generations as an example of what was possible when two people found each other against all odds. Young couples would visit their graves and leave flowers, hoping some of that luck and love would rub off on them. The Silver Spur Saloon eventually closed, but the table where they had played that fateful game was preserved and moved to the local historical society. It sat there with a small plaque explaining its significance, and people would run their hands over the smooth wood and imagine that night, that moment when everything changed, because that was the truth of it. In a single hand of poker, two lives had intersected and merged, creating something neither could have achieved alone. They had built a ranch, raised a family, survived hardship, and created a legacy of love and perseverance that would never be forgotten. And it had all started because a cowboy looked at a woman with fierce green eyes and decided that some things were worth more than winning. He had folded his hand and said those simple words, "It is all yours." He had given her the pot, but in return, she had given him the world. Years after both Blake and Beatrice had passed, their great-grandchildren still worked the ranch, still bred horses, still told the story of their remarkable ancestors. The Xander name was synonymous with quality and integrity throughout South Dakota and beyond. But more than the ranch or the reputation or the material success, what endured was the love story. It was told at weddings and anniversaries, shared between couples going through hard times, offered as proof that true love was not just possible but powerful enough to transform lives. Because Blake and Beatrice had not just loved each other. They had chosen each other, day after day, year after year, through fire and loss and all the challenges that life threw at them. They had been partners in every sense of the word, building something together that was greater than the sum of its parts. The ranch still stood strong, a testament to their vision and hard work. The school Beatrice had started had expanded into a proper schoolhouse that served the entire region. The horses that carried the Xander brand were prized for their quality and temperament, just as Blake had always dreamed. But the real legacy was in the hearts of the people they had touched. The children Beatrice had taught who went on to become teachers themselves. The neighbors Blake had helped who paid that kindness forward. The family they had raised with love and wisdom and unwavering support. On the anniversary of that first poker game each year, the family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. They would set up a card table on the porch, and someone would always suggest a game. And somewhere during the evening, someone would toast to Blake and Beatrice, to the cowboy who knew when to fold and the woman who knew when to go all in. Because that was what they had done, really. Beatrice had gone all in on Blake on the ranch on this life in the West. She had bet everything on love, and she had won more than she could have ever imagined. And Blake had folded his hand but won his heart's desire. He had given up the pot and gained a partner, a wife, a family, a life filled with meaning and purpose and deep, abiding joy. It was the best hand either of them had ever played, and its effects rippled outward through time, touching lives neither of them would ever meet, inspiring people who would never know their names but would benefit from the example they set. That is what true love does. It does not just change two people. It changes the world around them, creates ripples that spread farther than anyone can see, builds something that lasts long after the people themselves are gone. Blake Xander and Beatrice Kingsley had walked into a saloon as strangers and walked out as soulmates. They had faced the world together and emerged victorious, not because they never struggled, but because they never stopped fighting for each other and the life they wanted to build. And in the end, when all the hands had been played and all the cards were on the table, they could both look back and know with certainty that they had won the only game that really mattered. They had won each other. And that victory would last forever.